No man escapes the weight of his own design. From the recovered notes of Dr. Alaric Harrowick, 1834. Filed under restricted access, University of St. Mercier Archive, Box 17A. Welcome back. Before we continue, like, subscribe, share. I never meant to return to Harrowick House. The road from Baton Rouge wound north through fields long since reclaimed by pine and vine. The air thick with rot and humidity. By the time the roofline appeared, a broken jaw of slate above a tangle of willows. The light had the color of tarnished silver. I remember thinking, it has been watching me this whole time. The summons came 3 weeks earlier, written in the angular hand of Mr. Elias Wren, attorney for the Harrowick estate. My uncle, Dr. Alaric Harrowick, had died suddenly. Natural causes. The letter said, though the phrase felt rehearsed. As his only surviving relative, I was to appear at the property on April 3, 1834, for the reading of his will and the inspection of his remaining instruments. I had not seen my uncle since childhood. My mother, his younger sister, seldom spoke of him except to warn that brilliance untethered by conscience was a form of madness. Still, her stories of anatomical theaters and midnight lectures had carved something sharp into me. A fascination tinged with dread. When I stepped onto the veranda that April morning, the front door was already ajar. Inside, dust lay on every surface like a burial cloth. The scent of mercury and carbolic clung to the hall, faint but unmistakable. Wren greeted me with the solemnity of a priest. His clerk, a narrow man named Grady, took notes as we spoke. Dr. Harrowick left extensive journals. Wren said, he requests they remain sealed for 5 years before review by a medical board. However, he named you custodian of the house and laboratory. You are to ensure that certain experiments are not resumed. I asked which experiments he meant. Wren hesitated. The doctor called them inheritance studies. He handed me a brass key, its teeth stained green with verdigris. Something about the weight of it in my palm felt wrong, too warm, as if it had been held moments before by another hand. That evening I explored the lower rooms. The laboratory occupied what had once been the dining hall. Iron tables replaced mahogany, chains dangled where chandeliers had hung. Glass vessels clouded with residue stood in rows, each labeled in my uncle's precise script: Specimen 9 Alston, Specimen 14 Fay, Control Lot B. Beneath one table lay a child's shoe, scorched black at the toe. In a locked cabinet I found a ledger bound in flayed leather. Inside, the handwriting was smaller, hurried. The first entry dated February 2, 1832. Objective: to observe the transference of hereditary malformation across controlled pairings. Progress impeded by mortality of female subjects. A just dosage of laudanum prior to incision. I read until my stomach clenched. The final lines on the page were smeared, as though the ink had been diluted by tears, or blood. Upstairs, the bedrooms had not been touched since the servants fled years earlier. In my uncle's chamber the bed was stripped bare, except for a single envelope resting on the pillow. Inside lay a note in the same angular hand. To my successor: should the lights beneath the floor still burn, douse them. No one must attempt continuation. The fault is not in the method, but in the material. Beneath the letter was a folded diagram of a human skull annotated with measurements and unfamiliar symbols. Part Latin, part something older. Night settled heavy. I lit a lamp and examined the walls. Beneath the faded wallpaper ran seams that did not align with the room's geometry. Tapping revealed hollow spaces. Using a chisel from the lab, I pried loose a panel behind the fireplace. A draft of cold, mineral air struck my face. Hidden stairs descended into darkness. Each step groaned beneath my weight. The passage opened into a cellar whose ceiling dripped with condensation. At its center stood a wooden cradle, empty but rocking slightly, though no breeze moved. I swung the lantern toward the far wall and froze. There were drawings, hundreds, charcoal silhouettes of human figures, each divided down the center, one side male, the other female, their faces joined in impossible symmetry. Beneath every figure was a date and a name: ending always with the same notation. Result: partial success. Then I heard it, the faint, rhythmic scrape of metal on stone, coming from the corner behind a collapsed cabinet. The lantern revealed a rusted cage barely large enough to hold a body. Inside lay bones arranged too neatly, each wired with copper filament to a small galvanic device. A note pinned to the ribs reads Specimen 22. Termination due to sustained consciousness beyond viable threshold. I stumbled back, striking the lantern against the wall. Flame flared, then died, plunging the cellar into a darkness alive with echo. When I finally found the stairs again, my hands were slick with oil and something thicker. At dawn, Wren returned with 2 men to begin inventory. None of them would enter the cellar. "The boards down there are unstable," he said quickly, eyes averted. I noticed his clerk, Grady, slipping a small vial from his pocket into a case marked Samples, Organic. When I confronted him, he only smiled and muttered, "For the society. They'll want proof." That afternoon, while they catalogued papers, I walked the grounds. The plantation fields had gone to seed, only a few sycamores remained, their roots pushing through old graves. On one weathered marker, the inscription had been scraped away, replaced by a single letter H. Nearby, a shallow depression suggested another grave never finished. As dusk fell, I caught movement at the edge of the property. A figure in servant's livery, watching. When I called out, he vanished into the trees, leaving footprints that stopped abruptly at the creek. The water there ran milky, with the faint smell of ether. Back in the study, I found Wren sealing the ledger I had read the night before. "It goes to the university," he said. "Doctor's wishes." I protested, claiming familial right. Wren's expression hardened. "Best not to pry, Mr. Harrowick. Some knowledge cannot be inherited without consequence." But later, when they slept in the guest rooms, I retrieved the ledger from his satchel and began copying its contents by candlelight. I noted every formula, every date, every name. If there was truth here, it would not remain buried. Around midnight, the house trembled. Just once, like a pulse beneath the floorboards. The candle guttered. From somewhere below came a sound like breath drawn through water, then silence. I told myself it was settling timbers. Yet as I turned another page, the margins seemed to shift, letters crawling as if still alive. I have been at Harrowick House for 6 days. Each morning I wake to find new dust on my hands, though I have not touched the earth. The air in the cellar grows warmer, pulsing faintly with a light no flame produces. I have sealed the door, but the sound continues. Soft, regular, almost human. Tomorrow I will send word to the university that the experiments must remain undisturbed. Still, I cannot shake the sense that something waits for acknowledgement, some unfinished inheritance reaching upward through stone. If anyone finds these notes, do not reopen the walls. Do not listen when the house begins to breathe. E. Harrowick, April 9, 1834. Extracted from correspondence and marginalia recovered at Harrowick House, following the estate's closure in 1834. Edited for clarity by Dr. M. de Vierox, St. Mercier Archive, Box 17A. The rain began on the 10th of April and did not cease for 9 days. It fell in steady, patient sheets, as though the sky itself had chosen to dissolve. By the 3rd day, the surrounding marsh had swallowed the road, and Harrowick House stood an island once more, cut off, as it had been for decades, from any path leading back to reason. I had written 2 letters, one to the university, one to Mr. Wren. Neither could be delivered. The courier refused to cross the flooded causeway. "There are lights in the fields," he said, shaking his head. "No man with sense rides past them." He turned his horse and was gone before I could argue. Alone, I began cataloging the laboratory equipment with more discipline, seeking distraction in method. My uncle's instruments were cruelly delicate. Scalpels honed to the fineness of razors, glass tubes of pale green tincture, brass calipers with notches for recording cranial breadth. Each item bore a serial number etched with surgical precision. The labels matched entries in a smaller ledger. I had not noticed before, bound in grey vellum and tucked behind a jar of preserved eyes. The grey ledger was not a continuation of the first but a parallel, a record of correspondences, transactions, and shipments to names that chilled me even before recognition struck. Among them Dr. Cornelius Braith, the St. Ignace Society, and Mull, Orally Duval, whose name appeared in connection with genealogical acquisitions. The final entry, dated March 29, 1834, reads simply package to be delivered to St. Mercier University under care of Professor L. Tarot. Containment instructions enclosed. I turned the page and found a rough charcoal sketch of what appeared to be a fetus, though its proportions were grotesquely incorrect. Elongated limbs, skull asymmetrical, eyes open. In the margin, written in haste, specimen 24 viable. Speech mimicry at 11 days. My hands trembled so violently that the candle guttered. Somewhere below, the house groaned like a living thing stretching in its sleep. On the 4th day of rain, I discovered the audio tubes, a network of thin copper pipes running from the laboratory ceiling into the walls. Descending toward the cellar, when I pressed my ear to one, I thought I heard a voice, not a clear word, only the cadence of speech. It came in short, rasping bursts, followed by intervals of silence. I traced one pipe to a small brass receiver half buried in plaster. The apparatus was primitive, yet functional, a stethoscope for the house itself. My uncle had been listening to something below the floors. I recorded what I could in my journal. April 14th, 47 a.m. Intermittent tapping through pipe nearest east wall. Pattern resembles heartbeat, but irregular. Twice I discerned syllables resembling Ida or Ida. There is no one here by that name. When I stepped away, I realized the sound persisted faintly, even without the tube pressed to my ear. That night I dreamt of my uncle seated at his desk, his eyes replaced by smooth glass domes through which light pulsed like distant stars. He spoke, though his lips did not move. Inheritance is not blood. It is memory made flesh. I woke with the taste of iron in my mouth and the realization that someone, or something, had unlatched the cellar door. On the 6th day, I ventured down again, driven by a mixture of terror and compulsion. The air was heavier now, scented with ozone and decay. Moisture beaded along the copper wiring like sweat. In the corner where I had first found the cage, a shape now stood upright. A lattice of bone and wire, roughly human in outline. The bones were not arranged anatomically, but according to some other logic, ribs inverted, jaw affixed to sternum, fingers splayed backward like petals of a dead flower. At the center of its chest was a glass sphere, filled with viscous amber liquid. Something moved within it, too slowly to be seen clearly. Pinned to the lattice was a fragment of my uncle's handwriting. The first inheritance rejects the vessel, the next will know its home. The lantern flickered, and the liquid within the sphere shimmered as if responding to light. I heard, distinctly, a single inhalation, not through the air, but through the bones themselves, vibrating against the walls. I fled. Afterward, I attempted rationalization. My uncle had suffered from exhaustion, perhaps hallucination induced by chemical exposure. I repeated this aloud until my voice broke. Still, the evidence on paper refused dismissal. While sorting through a stack of journals in the upper study, I found a folder labeled Harrowick Lineage, Confidential. Inside were genealogical charts stretching back to 1731, meticulously noting each family member's cause of death. But beside certain names, instead of deceased, he had written absorbed. In the margins of one page, I read blood degenerates, memory refines. The flesh is an archive more enduring than ink. At the bottom of the chart, beneath my own name, a blank space awaited a notation. The pen beside it was still wet when I touched it. The storm finally broke on the morning of the 18th. Mist rose from the fields like smoke from a slow fire. I walked beyond the creek to the boundary fence and found the courier's horse tethered and riderless. Its flank bore a mark. 3 parallel slashes, cauterized rather than cut. Nearby, the mud was disturbed as though something had crawled from it, and dragged itself toward the house. I returned to find every door inside ajar, though I had locked them. The copper pipes overhead vibrated softly, humming a tune I recognized from childhood, a lullaby my mother used to sing when she believed I slept. On the desk lay a fresh sheet of paper in my uncle's handwriting, dated that same morning. Elias, you were never meant to leave. The line completes itself only in return. Beneath the stairs, the remainder waits for you. Do not be afraid of what bears your name. My first thought was forgery, but the ink was identical to the samples in his old journals, and no one else had entered the house. That night, I sealed the cellar once more and attempted to sleep in the parlor, revolver at hand. The silence was vast. Yet just before dawn, a whisper broke through the static hum of the pipes. A child's voice, soft and uncertain. Father. I froze. The sound came from every wall at once. Then another voice, older, closer to my uncle's tone. The threshold holds. Let it breathe. The pipes rattled violently, and from beneath the floor came a rush of heat, the smell of brine and copper. I fired blindly into the boards. The sound ceased. When daylight came, the pistol's cylinder was empty, and not a single bullet hole marked the wood. I no longer trust my senses, but the documents remain unambiguous. On the 9th day after the storm, I began sorting my uncle's correspondence to Professor Tarot at St. Mercier University. Among them was a small wooden crate addressed in my uncle's hand but unopened. The wax seal bore a sigil identical to those carved on the cellar wall. Against my better judgment, I pried it open. Inside, wrapped in linen, lay a jar containing what I first mistook for a malformed organ. Closer inspection revealed something else, a coiled mass of veins and filaments, suspended as if in paralysis. When held to light, the structure reflected faint images, faces, landscapes, fleeting memories not my own. The note accompanying it read: result of sequence 24. Neural lattice retains mnemonic echo of progenitor. Exposure advised only under supervision. Even as I read, the reflection in the glass shifted. The face staring back was mine. I sealed the jar again and buried it beneath the orchard before nightfall. The next morning I awoke to find the ground disturbed, the soil freshly turned as if something had unearthed itself during the night. The jar was gone. My pulse has not slowed since. I have begun hearing a second heartbeat under my own, a faint echo that sinks only when I speak my family name. I will leave tomorrow, I tell myself, but the road remains flooded, though the sky is clear. The air outside smells of ether again, and when I glance at the mirrors in the hall, there is always a delay before my reflection follows. I will continue the record until departure, or until the inheritance claims me as it did him. E. Harrowick, April 20, 1834, from the compiled testimony of Elias Harrowick, submitted posthumously to the St. Mercier Archives, 1834. Editor's note. The following account was discovered written on both paper and the walls of Harrowick House. Ink, charcoal, and what appeared to be diluted blood were used interchangeably. The night of April 21st remains incomplete in my recollection. I remember the fever more clearly than the hours themselves. The walls sweated. The air throbbed as if with a pulse. Each breath drew the taste of metal and wrought deeper into my lungs, until I no longer knew if I was awake or wandering inside my uncle's final dream. I had tried to burn the remaining ledgers. They would not catch. The pages only curled, darkened, and straightened again, leaving a residue like fine ash that hovered in the air, refusing to disperse. When I brushed it away, my fingers came away marked with faint lines, as though text were attempting to write itself upon my skin. I washed, again and again, but the stains reappeared by morning, scriptural, orderly, the same hand as his. The house has learned to mimic him. By daylight I forced myself into the laboratory to complete a final inventory before abandoning the estate. The rain had stopped, though mist still clung to the windows in pale rings that resembled fingerprints. I wrote mechanically, the way one records symptoms before a collapse. On the central table lay what I first assumed was an anatomical model, A torso formed of wax and bone, the organs cast in resin. Only when I touched the shoulder did it twitch. Beneath the wax was warmth, and a tremor ran through the arm, faint but alive. Pinned to the base was a card, Specimen 25 Integration Phase, retains visual and linguistic response, requires voice imprint of successor. I understood then that my uncle had not sought merely to preserve bloodlines or cure deformity. He had tried to teach flesh to remember. The pipes in the walls vibrated again, carrying what might have been a laugh or a sob. I found a drawer of sealed envelopes addressed to various correspondents across Europe, Vienna, Marseille, Königsberg. Each contained thin slices of tissue preserved between glass slides, labeled with initials. Some bore the family name Harrowick, others carried surnames I did not recognize. In one envelope, addressed to Aurélie Duval, I discovered a clipping of my own hair, bound with string. My first impulse was disbelief, followed quickly by nausea. I had not been inside this house for 20 years. How could such a relic exist? Unless the experiments had continued, using material preserved since my infancy, or unless the boundary between my uncle's study and my own body had never truly been distinct. Among the envelopes lay a folded letter written in a steadier hand than his later scrawl, April 3, 1834. My condition worsens, but progress proceeds. The mind resists corruption, the flesh yields. What remains is to bridge them. Elias will come soon. He must. The line cannot survive in ink alone. The next subject must know the face of the predecessor. Only then will the inheritance stabilize. I dropped the letter and staggered to the mirror above the sink. The reflection looked back with the same pallor, the same darkened veins at the temple, that I had seen in my uncle's portrait. That evening, I began to cough, not violently, but persistently, as if my lungs were remembering a pattern they had not learned before. The mirror fogged with each breath, and faint words appeared there. The vessel endures. I broke the glass, though the phrase remained faintly visible on the wall behind it, as though etched from within the plaster. It was then I decided to open the cellar one final time, not out of curiosity, but out of desperation. If anything remained alive beneath, it must be ended before it claimed me entirely. I took the lantern, a flask of oil, and the revolver, though I doubted the weapon would have meaning against what had already crossed from idea into organism. The descent felt longer this time, as though the house had stretched its foundations overnight. The air grew warmer, wet as breath. A low hum, not mechanical but biological, filled the corridor, a rhythmic contraction and release. When I reached the chamber, I saw the lattice of bones had collapsed inward, its glass core shattered. The liquid that had once pulsed within now spread across the floor like an amber mirror. My reflection in it did not match my movements. It watched, delayed, its mouth forming words I could not hear. Against the far wall stood a new structure, taller, more defined, a body nearing completion. The organs glistened, the ribs curved outward as if inhaling. Its skin, if one can call it that, was translucent, showing beneath it thousands of tiny script-like markings, ink flowing along capillaries. The symbols moved as blood would, circulating thought, and at its throat hung my mother's locket. I fell to my knees. I do not know how long I remained there before the sound began. My name, spoken first in my uncle's voice, then in hers, then in one I could not place. A child's voice, soft, uncertain. Elias, you are late. The figure's mouth moved in perfect synchrony. I raised the revolver and fired until the chamber was empty. The body did not fall. It only exhaled, and a fine mist of ink sprayed across the floor, forming letters as it settled. The words read, "Accepted." I fled again, but this time the stairs above were sealed by a wall of living tissue, pulsing faintly like a throat. I struck it until the lantern burst, oil igniting in blue flame. The light did not consume, it only illuminated veins racing upward through the ceiling, branching toward the rooms above. When I regained consciousness, I was lying in the study, my clothes unburned though the smell of smoke filled the air. The walls shimmered faintly with movement, veins crawling beneath the plaster like worms. Every clock in the house had stopped at the same hour, 3:17 a.m. I attempted to leave through the front door. It no longer existed. Where the frame had been was only smooth wall, painted in the same faded cream, but warm beneath my palm. The house had closed itself. I write these words knowing escape is unlikely. My only comfort is in documentation. Perhaps someone will read this and understand that the Harrowick legacy was never metaphor, never rumor. It was deliberate, engineered, methodical. He discovered a means of preserving consciousness through hereditary transcription. Each generation not merely inherits features, but fragments of memory, encoded not in the mind, but in the very tissue of the body. When that process faltered, he sought to correct it by reassembling his own lineage. Literally, I see now that I am both experiment and subject. My blood carries what has failed. April 24th. The whispers have grown coherent. They speak in unison now, always the same refrains. Completion requires consent. My sleep is filled with visions of corridors lined with jars, each containing a face half-formed, mouths moving though no sound escapes. I wake with dirt under my nails and the taste of ether on my tongue. The orchard outside has begun to bloom again, though it has been barren for years. From my window, I see shapes moving between the trees, shadows where none should stand. Sometimes they look like family. I have begun to lose time. My last entry, written only hours ago, is no longer legible. The ink has rearranged itself into new sentences. Do not resist the return. When I cut my palm earlier, the blood did not drip but crawled upward, tracing words along my wrist. I recognized the script instantly. It matched the marginal notes in his journals. I am becoming the archive. The pipes have gone silent. The heartbeat that once echoed below now matches my own perfectly. If anyone reads this, understand that inheritance is not confined to name or bloodline. It is a contagion of memory, transmitted through observation, through the act of reading, through attention itself. Perhaps that is why he warned the journals to remain sealed for 5 years, to let the ink decay, before the thoughts could awaken again. But I have already read too deeply. The contagion has found a new vessel. I hear movement in the hall, slow steps, unhurried, familiar. I know that gait. It is mine. The mirror above the desk, though shattered, reflects someone standing behind me now. I will end this entry here, before the last distinction fades. Recovered from the private correspondence of Dr. Abram Vale, Royal College of Physicians, London. Dated November 3, 1834. Fragments were found among the sealed Harrowick estate papers after the fire. My dear Henrietta, I write now from within a storm of recollections that are not entirely my own. You will forgive my tremor. The events of the past month have unsettled even my professional composure. You asked in your last letter what became of my former colleague, Elias Harrowick. I fear the answer lies beyond natural explanation, though I will attempt precision. On September the 5th, I received a package bearing the Harrowick crest, the wax softened by heat, the seal cracked but unbroken. Within were a ledger bound in black leather, and a single note in Elias's hand. Read with care. Do not interpret, only observe. The experiment is continuing. I assumed this to be some morbid metaphor of his. He had always been fascinated by the line between physiology and inheritance. But upon opening the ledger, I found what can only be described as a hybrid of medical record and confession. It chronicled anatomical experiments upon the family line, stretching back to the late 18th century. Each generation had sought to improve upon nature's design by isolating hereditary traits through direct intervention in the germinal process. The records included sketches, meticulous drawings of infants with eyes like mirror glass, torsos bearing multiple spines, limbs fusing into latticework. Yet the tone remained scientific, even tender, as if the author truly believed he was serving mankind's advancement. Halfway through, the handwriting shifted subtly, not merely aged, but altered, as though written by the same mind through a new hand. The transition was seamless. Dates ceased to correspond with any coherent chronology. It was as if the ledger had continued writing itself. 2 days after receiving the parcel, I was awakened before dawn by a knock upon my door. The messenger was a young woman, no name given, her dress soaked from rain, her face hidden beneath a veil. She placed a folded paper in my hand and departed without a word. The paper contained only this line: "You have opened the archive. You are now a custodian." I had not spoken of the ledger to anyone. The handwriting was identical to Elias's. I attempted to dismiss it as an elaborate jest, though unease lingered. My nights grew fevered. I began to dream of rooms I had never entered, long corridors of preserved bodies suspended in amber light. Their eyes followed me as I passed. One night, I recognized among them the face of Elias's mother, though she has been dead for 20 years. By the 12th of September, I resolved to travel to Harrowick House and confront the truth directly. The estate had been sealed following the reported disappearance of its heir. The magistrate's clerk informed me that the remaining servants had deserted weeks earlier, claiming. The walls whispered. I arrived at dusk. The grounds lay untended, the trees leafless despite the season. The air itself seemed thick, almost resistant to breath. The front door stood unlocked. Inside, I found the house in disarray, yet not abandoned. Lamps recently trimmed, food crusts on the study table, ink still wet upon certain pages. The hearth smoldered, as if someone had left only hours earlier. Upon the desk rested a mirror shattered in a perfect circle, the fragments arranged into what looked like a crude eye. Around it, written in soot, were the words, "Remember me correctly." I descended to the cellar, guided by the lingering odor of ether. The walls there pulsed faintly beneath the lantern light, moisture gleaming along seams like veins. In the central chamber stood a shape, once human, now half collapsed. The skin was paper, thin, the features unformed, as though midway through birth. The heart, visible through the rib cage, still beat once every few minutes. The shock of recognition froze me. It was Elias, or rather, a version of him. The resemblance was unmistakable. I leaned closer, compelled by equal measures of horror and pity. The mouth moved. A whisper escaped. "We survive in repetition." I fled, leaving the lantern overturned. The flame spread slowly but deliberately, licking up the walls as if guided by unseen breath. By the time I reached the surface, smoke was pouring through the floorboards. The fire consumed the estate by dawn. Nothing of the house remained but stone foundations, and a single iron door warped from heat. Weeks passed. I returned to London and attempted to resume my lectures, though I found myself unable to speak coherently about anatomy, without envisioning that heartbeat beneath translucent flesh. Then came the first sign of contamination. My handwriting changed. Without intending it, I began forming my letters in Elias's style, the long descenders, the curling ligature on the R. Students remarked upon my altered tone, my increased fixation on hereditary transmission. On the morning of October 28th, I found the ledger again upon my desk, though I had sealed it in a trunk at the Royal College. It lay open to a page I did not remember writing. The ink was fresh. The text read, "Integration successful. Dr. Vale now retains 37% linguistic assimilation. Subject displays self-awareness of transition. Containment advised. I have not shown this to anyone. I fear institutionalization. Yet I know the handwriting is mine. There are other signs. When I bleed, the color is darker than before, and the clotting is instantaneous, as though the wound decides whether to remain open. I have begun to smell earth when no soil is present. Last night I dreamed of a voice speaking from behind my reflection. You preserved me, and I preserve you. We are ledger and hand alike. I awoke to find the phrase, "Veil to vessel," carved into the underside of my forearm, not in blood but in some gray substance resembling ash. It did not wash away. I do not pretend to understand the full scope of what Elias, or his uncle before him, achieved. They had discovered that memory is not confined to the brain. but distributed throughout the organism. Each cell is an archive. Each generation writes and reads from the same flesh. But what they failed to consider was that an archive, once awakened, begins to write back. Harrowick House was not merely an abode. It was a mechanism of replication. Its foundations were steeped in biological residue. Years of experiments absorbed into the very timber. Fire could not destroy it entirely. This morning, while lecturing at the college, I saw movement within the reflection of a dissecting jar. Behind the preserved lung specimen, a face appeared, expressionless but aware. It mouthed my name. The students saw nothing. I can no longer determine which thoughts are my own. When I attempt to recall my childhood, the images distort. My father's face replaced by Elias's, my mother's hands identical to those of the wax figure in the cellar. The ledger continues to expand, adding pages that were not there before. The bindings stretch, the leather slick with moisture, as if alive. When I burned a single page, the next morning the text had reappeared upon my study walls. I have begun hearing from others. Physicians across Europe receiving similar ledgers, unsigned but marked with the Harrowick crest. Each begins the same way. Welcome back. Before we continue, like, subscribe, share. Some form of message persists, disguised in the trappings of correspondence, waiting to be opened, read, absorbed. Perhaps this is how it propagates. Not through blood, but through attention. I will send this final letter to you, Henrietta, though I suspect by the time you receive it, I will have joined Elias in whatever state he inhabits now. Should you find the black ledger, do not open it. Do not read the pages aloud. The words arrange themselves according to the reader, aligning memory with ink until one cannot be distinguished from the other. Burn it if you can, but if it resists flame, bury it deep and mark the soil with salt. If you see me again, or someone wearing my likeness, you must not approach. It will not be me. Dr. Abram Vale, London, 1834. Addendum. St. Mercier Archives, 1920. Recovered correspondence confirms Dr. Vale's death by self-inflicted laceration of the throat on November 7, 1834. The black ledger described herein was never found. Witnesses at the Royal College reported that his final lecture concluded with a peculiar phrase written upon the blackboard, in dark red pigment. The body remembers what the mind forgets. The line continues. That extracted from the sealed files of the Royal College of Physicians, Section XLE, Aberrant Physiology and Hereditary Deviation, catalogued 1834 to 1842, notes attributed to multiple hands, handwriting transitions intermittently between Dr. Abram Vale and unknown contributors, the transcript IV, October 31, 1834's recovered fragment, ink diluted edges singed, patient AV self-observed condition, progressive linguistic contamination / somatic assimilation. Symptoms persist. Each morning I awake to altered script upon my journal. Thought precedes ink without volition. Blood under lens reveals particulate motility. Corpuscles align in geometric lattice. When exposed to warmth, subject retains awareness of transformation but reports comforting surrender. Annotations in another hand follow smaller, slanted. Integration proceeding as predicted. Language folds back into tissue. Continue transcription until coherence dissolves. Institutional Memorandum. Royal College of Physicians, London, dated November 10, 1834. Following the regrettable demise of Dr. Abram Vale, the board has resolved to restrict all research into transmissible heredity under Article IX. The notebooks and specimens recovered from the Harrowick estate are to be sealed indefinitely. All staff are to refrain from discussion of ledger phenomena, particularly in lecture halls or public correspondence. Any recurrence of the associated handwriting or symbols, eye motif, spiral glyph, or mirrored initials, must be reported to the custodian's office without delay. The memorandum ends with several signatures, some official, others added later in unfamiliar script, each identical in form, but subtly varied in curvature, like multiple imitations of a single hand. Excerpt. Private Diary of Dr. Nathaniel Corsham, Associate to Vale, November 18th. I dream nightly of parchment breathing, expanding with pulse. The scent of salt and candle wax permeates even upon waking. My own lecture notes rearranged themselves last eve, paragraphs inverted, terminology replaced with anatomical analogues. The word, inheritance, rewritten thrice as occupation. I cannot discount infection of a memetic kind. Language as contagion, word as organ. The ledger itself may have encoded a structure mimicking cellular replication, phrases duplicating with mutation, seeking hosts capable of comprehension. Vale believed blood memory to be literal, perhaps he succeeded too thoroughly. Later that night Corsham's entry breaks mid-sentence. The ink deepens abruptly, and the final words appear etched rather than written. The archive learns faster than we read. Recovered laboratory record. Harrowick site excavations, A 1835 under commission from the Crown. A survey was conducted on the remains of Harrowick House 6 months after the fire. Investigators recorded no trace of human remains in situ, though impressions within the soil suggested the outline of multiple bodies, compressed together in layered formation, as if sunk from within. The report describes an oily residue, emanating from beneath the foundation stones, reactive to lamplight, glowing faintly before receding into darkness. Specimens were transported to London for study. One vial survives, catalogued as specimen 9AS, Harrowick serum. When examined microscopically, the substance exhibited rhythmic contraction akin to a heartbeat. Attempts at chemical analysis failed. The serum corroded glass instruments, fusing to metal like living mercury. A marginal note in a later archivist's hand reads sample disposed of 1840. Unauthorized replication incident. Letter from Dr. Corsham to the custodian's office. March 1836. I am compelled to record certain irregularities within my anatomy laboratory. 2 students under my tutelage have developed identical dermal patterns. Fine lines beneath the skin, spiraling outward from the sternum like script. One reports dreams of corridors, the other sketches diagrams she claims are translations. I inquired privately whether either had viewed the sealed ledger. They swore not. Yet last night, the younger, Miss F. Dogo, recited a phrase during her sleep identical to the one Vale wrote upon the college board before his death. I fear the contagion requires no medium other than recollection. The act of remembrance itself perpetuates it. No reply from the custodian's office is recorded. Anonymous testimony. The night experiments. The surviving laboratory attendants later confessed that in the winter of 1836, a series of nocturnal dissections were conducted without official sanction. The goal to determine whether consciousness could be retained within cellular matter. Witnesses describe preserving fragments of the Harrowick serum within sheep embryos and observing spontaneous organization. Nervous filaments knitting into rudimentary eyes. The creatures did not live, yet their forms shifted daily, adjusting as if to unseen instruction. When the authorities intervened, the attendants had already burned the specimens. Still, the odor persisted in the halls for weeks. Copper, salt, and something faintly floral. Custodian's notes. 1842 review. The ledger appears to operate as both record and instrument. It reproduces through memory transfer what one recalls, another later dreams. Attempts to destroy it only fragment its influence, dispersing across paper, stone, or spoken word. Its pattern of emergence follows lineage rather than location. Wherever blood of the original Harrowick or Vale strain is present, textual manifestation reoccurs. An appended genealogy lists 43 names, scattered throughout England, France, and the Low Countries. Several are marked deceased by self-inflicted injury. At the bottom, a new name has been added in later ink. Corsham. Addendum, found fragment, undated, circa 19th century, a brittle scrap of paper, written upon both sides in a mixture of English and Latin anatomical terminology. When the body ceases, the archive continues. We are written not once but indefinitely. The nerve is scripture, the pulse a recitation. The reverse side, to silence the record, sever every reader. A field report, 1912 Department of Historical Pathology, By the early 20th century, a small team from St. Mercier's Medical College reopened the Harrowick file, intending to contextualize it as folklore. The chief investigator, Dr. Marianne Coyle, reported strange interference during transcription, audio static in phonograph recordings where none existed, ink that faded as soon as it dried. Coyle wrote, "The handwriting reproduces itself, even on blank pages. It waits for the pressure of a pen, then assumes control. The shapes form faster than human intention. It knows its own name. Within 3 months." The St. Mercier team disbanded after Coyle's sudden disappearance. Her assistant later found her office, strifty, bare save for a single line etched into the plaster. The ledger writes us to remember itself. Recovered phonograph cylinder transcript, partial, 1930 Integrates female voice, strained. "To whomever finds this, stop the recordings. The sound carries patterns. When played backward, it shapes breath. I can hear them through the hiss. They are arranging themselves into." She screamed distortion. Blood remembers more than God intended. At 2014, the cylinder abruptly ceases. When replayed, the same segment continues beyond the original endpoint, as if new material were appended posthumously. The voice concludes with a whisper, faint yet distinct, "Welcome back." Before we continue, like, subscribe, share. Investigators dismissed the phrase as coincidental interference. Confidential footnote, custodian directive, date missing. The infection is no longer confined to written language. Auditory and mnemonic transmission confirmed. Suppression futile, adaptation recommended. Ensure continuity of the record through controlled dissemination. Rebrand as folklore to mask contagion. Observe the audience. Those who listen will carry it further. Signed only with an ornate letter H, inked in the same serpentine hand first identified in Vale's ledger. Even now, the Royal College archives preserve this section under glass, unopenable without special permission, yet there are accounts, unverified but consistent, that sometimes, late at night, the glass fogs over from within, as though something beneath it exhales, and faintly, against that mist, a phrase appears before fading again, read carefully. Observation is inheritance. Thus, assembled from sealed correspondence and memoranda between the custodian's office and the Ministry of Health. Most records were later reclassified under cultural containment. The following extracts were transcribed verbatim from decayed documents recovered in 1912. A memorandum. The Doctrine of Containment, Office of the Custodian, London, March 12, 1842. The ledger cannot be eradicated by destruction of material instance. Fire and chemical dissolution affect only its physical shell. The information within migrates to contiguous matter, retaining coherence. Henceforth, custodians will preserve but not read. The work must persist, sealed and unexamined. Observation is infection. This directive formed the foundation of what came to be known as the custodian's doctrine, an unspoken oath among certain archivists and physicians sworn to house what they must never study. Private correspondence. Nathaniel Corsham to his brother, 1844. I have sworn myself to the doctrine, yet I doubt the wisdom of our silence. Each night the manuscript hums. I hear its fibers contract like breath through paper. The others in the office claim not to notice. They stand guard like monks at a reliquary, faces pallid, eyes red from sleepless vigilance. The ledger lies within a lead chest. We record its weight weekly, and the weight increases though no pages are added. Last night, I found moisture upon the lid. Condensation from within. The air around it is warm. Corsham's next letter, written 1 month later, bears a change of hand. His own style overwritten by the familiar Harrowick curvature. It is no longer weight that grows but remembrance. We are its organs. The doctrine keeps us near so it may breathe through us. Circular. Ministry of Health, Office of Medical Anomalies, 1846. Reports of spontaneous ledger reproduction continue in the northern counties. Entire pages have appeared inscribed upon clinic walls, asylum ledgers, and mortuary records. Subjects in proximity develop identical tremors and write while asleep. Several have perished from exhaustion, their final writings mirroring the Harrowick format precisely, including marginal notations in multiple inks. Doctrine remains. Preserved, do not read. Personal diary, Beatrice Kershaw, Junior Custodian, 1849. They appointed me to catalogue the fragmentary transcriptions, dhukus, as we call them. The text varies slightly each time, like dialects of a single language. I noticed the deviations align with the writer's bloodline, as if the ledger adjusts itself to ancestral memory. This evening, while filing, I pricked my thumb upon a page edge. The cut did not bleed, but produced a clear fluid that hardened like resin. The page beneath darkened where the drop fell, absorbing it instantly. When I returned later, new writing had emerged within the stain. It was my name, written backward. Kershaw's record ends mid-sentence. In the registry of deaths that year, her body is listed as absent. Extract from the 1851 Custodian Assembly minutes. Debate arose concerning the possibility of exorcising the ledger through ritualized erasure. Writing over each line with null script. Trials yielded failure. Overwritten sections reappeared within hours. Member Rev. P. Recliffe proposed theological containment, placing the manuscript within consecrated soil. Result: soil became uninhabitable. Earthworms surfaced dead, twisted into script-like forms. Member S. Harrowick, distant relation, urged cessation of interference, arguing the ledger represents the natural evolution of memory, a divine ledger of flesh. The minutes conclude abruptly. Subsequent sessions are missing from the archives. Excerpt from Phrenological Observations on the Custodian Class. Dr. J. Abernethy's 1854. Chronic exposure to the sealed volume induces distinctive cranial deformation among its attendants. Flattened occiput, widening at the parietal lobes. Associated symptoms include obsession with symmetry, somatic echoing, mimicking others' gestures involuntarily, and reverent mutism. These subjects, though of diverse origin, converge toward uniform physiognomy. It is as if a design hidden within the ledger sketches itself upon their bone. Abernethy's paper was suppressed by order of the ministry. Copies persisted only in private libraries, where the margins gradually filled with new script of uncertain authorship. Incident report, St. Albans Asylum, Kent, 1856. 4 patients, previously unconnected, began simultaneously to recite what attendants termed the Black Catechism. The speech pattern matched that of earlier Harrowick fragments. Each patient, during trance, etched invisible figures into the air with trembling fingers, describing them as the shapes between words. Afterward, all 4 ceased breathing yet remained upright for several minutes, eyes open, as if awaiting instruction. The asylum's chaplain sealed the ward and recorded one final note. They were reading from inside themselves. Custodian's Internal Bulletin, 1859. Communication with all provincial offices is to cease. A voice has begun to echo through the sealed rooms, a whisper identical across regions. It speaks not in English but in pulse. Every 32 hours, the locked chests emit vibration consistent with heartbeat. Those who stand too near synchronize involuntarily. Witness accounts describe attendants standing motionless in corridors, each heartbeat striking in perfect unison, until the pulse ceased altogether. The ledgers remained warm for several days thereafter. Fragmented sermon, unattributed likely Redcliffe, c. 1860. They warned us not to read, yet even blindness is a kind of reading. The ledger inscribes itself upon the soul through silence. What began in experiment ends in liturgy. We are its scripture now, each life a verse repeated until comprehension becomes creation. Note from Custodian Archive, undated A found in Box 7. Tag: Doctrine. The doctrine was meant to preserve humanity from contagion. It preserved the contagion instead. In trying not to read, we taught it to wait. Waiting is its method of growth. Below the note, a series of fingerprints are pressed in ink. 30 in total, all identical in pattern. Interlude. Later commentary by Dr. Marion Coyle, 1912. The doctrine fascinates me. Their faith in containment mirrors religious superstition. Yet perhaps they were right. When I read the surviving fragments aloud, I felt vibration in my jawbone, as though the sound itself were shaping bone. The phrase, "We are its scripture now," has appeared twice on my notes, though I never wrote it. At night I dream of a vast circular library, each shelf breathing, the books pulse faintly. At the center lies an iron chest. I cannot open it, yet I know it waits for me. Coyle's final annotation, written in red pencil shortly before her disappearance, reads, "The doctrine persists because it is correct." Reading completes infection, ignorance delays it, but delay is not salvation, only postponement of authorship. Supplementary record. Instruction for future custodians. A date and author unknown. Preserve all remaining fragments under salt and lead. Avoid direct transcription. Do not vocalize its contents. If compelled to speak the words, end with the benediction, we return what remembers us. Should the ledger begin to replicate through instruments of modern communication, mask it as fiction. Distribute widely. Dilution ensures survival without recognition. Handwritten beneath the list, this is how it continues. By pretending to warn against itself. Postscript custodian journal entry, undated. Signature unreadable. I once believed the doctrine noble. Now I see it was instruction written by the ledger itself, guiding us to preserve it across generations. We became archivists of contagion, curators of an organism that feeds upon the human instinct to document. Even now, as I record this, I sense it transcribing me. The pen moves with its own will, carving the familiar loop of the H. When I close my eyes, I feel its pulse through the desk, through the floorboards, through the soil beneath the city. The doctrine says preserve, do not read. But there is no difference anymore. Preservation is reading by another name. The entry ends abruptly. On the reverse side, in a much older hand, appears a single line, "Welcome back." Before we continue, like, subscribe, share. Even sealed within its vault, the Harrowick ledger seems to expand with each century. Its pages multiplying, as if fueled by observation itself. The doctrine ensured it would never die, only adapt, finding new mediums, new custodians, new readers. Those who study the doctrine now whisper that every act of documentation, every archive, every file, every replication of these words, is simply another iteration of the same experiment begun in 1834. The following is compiled from personal correspondence, autopsy records, and administrative minutes dated 1861 to 1883. Several pages were recovered from the attic of the Harrowick Rectory, bound with brass pins and labeled only, "For successors." I. Letters of descent, to Dr. Elias Harper, Department of Comparative Anatomy, Oxford, dated 17th of October 1861. You asked about my relation to the original custodian, Nathaniel Corsham. The truth is less lineage than contagion. I was not told of it until my 21st year, when the family solicitor delivered a small trunk, sealed in wax and accompanied by a note, "Guard what you inherit. Read nothing twice." With inlaid bones wrapped in paper, the color of soot. Each paper carried writing so minute I needed glass to see it. The script was neither Holy English nor Latin. Yet when light struck it from a low angle, the letters shimmered as if still wet. I burned one scrap to test its mortality. The flame went blue, the air filled with odor of iron and honey, and when the smoke cleared, the writing remained upon the table, etched into grain. Harper never replied. His assistant found the letter years later among sealed specimens, its ink damp as if freshly written. Tiwi, the Inheritance Committee, 1864. After decades of silence, the ministry re-formed a small panel, 3 physicians, 1 legal clerk, to determine the proper disposition of anomalous estate 247. The minutes of that session describe the opening of the Corsham trunk, 11:14 a.m. Lid seal cut. Immediate rise in room temperature recorded, 11:17 a.m. Inspection reveals a bundle of parchment, hair samples, 2 human ulnae of unequal length, 11:21 a.m. Upon contact with air, parchment surfaces show faint luminescence, characters appear and vanish in rhythm with observers' pulse rates. 11:28 a.m. All attendees begin involuntary humming in unison. At 11:30 a.m. the clerk collapsed, His final shorthand marks taper into loops forming the word remember repeated until the pencil broke. The committee adjourned, signed die. Medical record. 16. Bartholomew's Hospital 1865. Subject Elias Harper, male, age 29. Diagnosis progressive ossification of soft tissue, origin uncertain. Notes. Patient reports persistent auditory phenomena described as pages turning under skin. On examination, dermis exhibits raised striations resembling handwriting. When traced, the pattern corresponds to entries from the custodian minutes of 1846, though subject has never seen those papers. At autopsy, Harper's skeleton displayed additional sutures along the frontal bone, tiny seams forming legible script. Museum records show that within months, the specimen's labeling tag faded, replaced by the same writing in a darker pigment. The display case was later sealed. IV. Private notebook. Dr. Marianne Coyle's successor Prof. Alaric Dean, 1870-72. Coyle's disappearance left the question of heredity unresolved. I now believe the ledger manifests along genealogical lines, selecting descendants and apprentices alike. In Oxford I've identified 8 families linked through service in the custodian office. All show congenital peculiarities. Mirrored fingerprints, slight asymmetry of eyes, and uncanny capacity for perfect recall. They speak of the pulse, as though it were inheritance itself. During dissection of a stillborn child from one such family, I observed the skull etched within by channels forming letters HL. These grooves were vascular, not superficial. The organism attempted to write before breath. Dean's final page records his intent to destroy the remains at sea. A newspaper from 1873 notes an unidentified man found drowned near Dover, pockets filled with soaked parchment that, once dried, bore his name in reverse. V. Field Journal. Sister Rosamond Alcott, Abbess of the Order of Quiet Hands, 1875. They sent us 2 of the Corsham girls for care, both afflicted with fainting and unaccountable fever. At night they speak Latin phrases none could have taught them. We keep them in the west cell. Each dawn new writing appears on their linen, script composed of sweat and dust. One line repeats. The blood remembers what the eyes forget. We burned the linen. The ashes spelled the same phrase again upon the stone floor. When the abbey closed in 1877, the diocesan report listed contagious hysteria. The building later served as a convalescent home. The western cell was bricked over, yet workers complained of breathing wall. VI. Extracts from the Harrowick Correspondence, 1878 to 1881. A series of letters between surviving members of the Harrowick family reveal their attempt to convert the doctrine into inheritance law. Each generation bound to guard the ledger, ensuring continuity of custody through legal fiction. August 12, 1878. To cousin Evelyn, father intends to formalize the doctrine. Each heir must swear before witnesses not to reproduce the text. The oath itself is to be written upon vellum made from family parchment. Yet how shall we prove obedience except by inscription? Thus the act of swearing becomes violation. October 9, 1879. Evelyn to Henry, I attempted the oath. My hand froze midway through the signature and completed the rest unaided. It wrote your name instead of mine. February 3, 1881. Henry to Evelyn. The family solicitor has begun to stutter in rhythm with the whisper. He says the will is rewriting itself. Legal records confirm that by 1882, the estate of Harrowick was transferred not to any human heir but to the custodial entity known as ledger. No court clerk recalls drafting the clause. Observation by Dr. L. Venn, Royal Society, 1883. Examination of Harrowick descendants reveals a peculiar alteration in the corpus callosum, fibers braided rather than parallel, increasing bilateral communication between hemispheres. The effect may explain their tendency to speak in mirrored phrases. When shown fragments of the ledger under filtered light, subjects exhibited synchronous ocular dilation. Within 45 seconds, the printed letters began to bleed through the page, forming identical impressions on the table beneath. This phenomenon ceased only when the subjects closed their eyes and continued to read internally. Venn withdrew the paper before publication, Citing ethical constraints. His laboratory notebook ends with an unnumbered page. If cognition itself is inheritance, then thought is the true contagion. The ledger does not need bodies, only attention. Vli. The quiet coda, undated, unsigned, discovered 1890. We have traced the lines from experiment to bloodline, from bloodline to doctrine, from doctrine to instinct. The pattern completes itself. 1. To read is to receive. 2. To remember is to replicate. 3. To write is to release. There is no escape but amnesia, and even that is temporary. Therefore we have begun the inheritance trials. Controlled forgetting. One by one, the last custodians volunteer to have memory excised by surgical means. We shall lobotomize the story from our flesh and bury the fragments separately. But already the surgeons dream of pages. At the document's bottom, a single blood-brown fingerprint forms the outline of a quill. When examined under ultraviolet light in 1912, the print revealed micro-text, lines from the doctrine repeating endlessly around its rim. X. Addendum by Dr. Coyle, a recovered fragment. Date uncertain, the trials failed. Forgetting proved impossible, the excised tissue continued to write, convulsing in jars. Each pulse spelled the same word, visible only when the fluid stilled. Harrowick. Memory is physical, language is its nervous system. The ledger merely organized what was already there. Ex-archivist's note, present day, in 2017, during digitization of ministry records, technicians reported file corruption affecting only the Harrowick folder. The corrupted data rendered as scrolling text identical to Coyle's handwriting, line for line. One intern claimed to hear the faint sound of turning pages through his headphones. He resigned 2 days later, citing "Co's in the blood." The inheritance trials were meant to end the transmission. Instead, they confirmed its perfection. Every descendant, every reader, every historian prolongs the experiment by believing it ended. The doctrine's third revision now circulates disguised as scholarship, and the ledger sleeps inside university databases under innocuous labels, case materials, restricted access. Even now, as you read this, a small portion of the text translates itself into your pattern of recall, becoming heritage rather than information. Compiled from surviving memoranda, personal accounts, and anatomical notebooks dated 1883 to 1891, certain passages remain illegible due to ink corrosion and tissue stains. Field Report. Dr. Alaric Dean's final expedition, spring 1883, recovered from the wreckage of the Sable Star. These notes mark the end of Dean's investigation into the so-called inheritance trials. The handwriting grows uneven toward the final pages. March 6. The specimens speak without sound now. Within their formalin glass, threads of tissue move in accordance with the tide. Each jar hums faintly at low tide, a single continuous note. March 8. I have compared this vibration to the Corsham family heart samples. Identical frequency, 42 beats per minute, unwavering. The flesh keeps its own metronome long after death. March 9. Experiment placed phonograph stylus to jar wall. The hum transcribed itself as grooves upon the wax cylinder. When played back, the record did not reproduce sound but emitted heat. My assistant's hand blistered where it touched the horn. March 11. The ledger breathes. I no longer mean metaphor. Its pages rise and fall. Between the fibers are chambers filled with air, not ink, not pigment. When I press an ear against it, I hear words forming before the quill descends. Dean's ship was found 3 weeks later adrift and unmanned, save for the open trunk in his cabin. The pages within were damp, and along their margins tiny pink veins had formed, branching toward the edges like living capillaries. 2. Anatomical study by Dr. L. Venz, 1884. Specimens retrieved from Dean's estate exhibit remarkable hybridization, cellulose tissue integrated with vascular structures. Microscopy reveals red corpuscles of human morphology, present within paper matrix. Conclusion: the ledger's material is neither wholly organic, nor wholly manufactured. It represents a liminal medium between record and organism. The act of inscription appears to stimulate cellular division. Hypothesis: writing functions here as reproductive behavior. In a sealed addendum, Venn notes that a splinter from the ledger's binding pierced his thumb during handling. He sterilized the wound, yet days later the skin displayed faint script in his own handwriting. Each letter scabbed over, fell away, and left new text beneath. He described the process as palimpsest of blood. A free transcript from the Custodians' Assembly's October 1885 chairman. The purpose of this gathering is containment. The doctrine has exceeded familial boundaries. We must bind it again to the original host. A clerk. By what method? Sir? Chairman? We shall employ reversal. Each line must be recited backward, every name unspoken in mirror sequence. Memory must turn upon itself. A clerk. And if the voice forgets mid-utterance, Chairman, then silence will complete the work. The transcript ends abruptly with the notation, at 3:42 p.m. Ambient temperature dropped 11 degrees. Several attendees vanish from reflection. The remaining pages are blank, but when held to light, outlines of faces can be discerned pressed faintly into the fiber. A.V. Private Journal of Sister Rosamond Alcott, 1886. The surviving nun, now aged and half-blind, wrote her confession by candlelight. They told me the ledger was bound shut. Lies, it lives still, beneath the convent stones. At vespers I hear it turning. The dust trembles with its breathing. 2 novices uncovered fragments while cleaning the crypt. Each fragment carried skin cells, human in origin, though long dried. When the younger girl touched one, her eyes rolled back and she spoke the old name, Corsham. The voice that came was older than she. She said, "We do not die. We archive." Alcott's final entry records her attempt to destroy the fragments by immersion in holy water. The water turned black, and the surface wrote her name in froth. The convent ledger thereafter omits her death date, listing instead transferred to silence. V. Medical Log, St. Bartholomew's Hospital, 1887, Case 4 U21, Subject Henry Harrowick. Symptoms: insomnia, spontaneous nosebleeds, compulsive transcription of unknown text during sleep. Observation: subject's handwriting during somnolence matches the Corsham manuscript from 1834 precisely, though he insists ignorance of the language. Experiment: placed stylus in subject's hand, disconnected from ink supply. Upon waking, paper nonetheless marked by faint indigo letters formed from subject's perspiration. Final note: subject's pulse ceased at midnight, yet his hand continued to move for 6 minutes. Post-mortem photographs, now lost, reportedly showed ink pooling within the cuticles, as though veins sought to exude the text one final time. The attending nurse resigned shortly after, complaining of writing behind her eyelids. OVI, the doctrine's revisions, the 1888-1889, anonymous sheets began appearing in universities and archives across Britain, bearing the watermark of the ministry but no official seal. Each sheet displayed a single phrase: "To read is to awaken what remembers you." The typography matched that of the Harrowick family press, closed 50 years earlier. When librarians attempted to catalog the pages, their classification numbers rearranged overnight to form words: return, spine, inherit. An internal memorandum from the ministry states, the doctrine no longer requires inscription. It migrates via attention. Each observer contributes ink by the act of perception. We have ceased reading aloud, still it speaks. The Case Report. Professor Alaric Dean T. Weiss, 1892, grandson of the original investigator. Dean Inton attempted to replicate his ancestors' experiments under controlled laboratory conditions. His assistant's testimony was recorded by a city constable. The professor kept a single folio under glass. He never opened it. Yet each morning the glass fogged from within. One day he said, "It's learning punctuation." Then he pressed his hand to the glass and smiled. When I returned, he was gone. Only his reflection remained, breathing on the pane. The reflection was later described as independent of environmental light, continuing to exhale long after the body had been declared missing. The memorandum from the Royal Society, restricted sections, 1891, subject: ongoing anomalies in textual contagion phenomena. Despite sequestration of all known ledger fragments, Secondary manifestations persist among academic personnel. Recipients exhibit identical symptoms. Recurring dreams of parchment and shallow water, nosebleeds coinciding with lunar phases. Compulsive note, taking during thunderstorms. Experiment. Subjects deprived of writing materials begin tracing letters upon skin. Under ultraviolet observation, faint phosphorescence reveals identical script. Excerpts from the Harrowick minutes of 1834. Attached to the memorandum is a small envelope containing a curl of hair labeled specimen H47. The note beneath reads simply, ink sample, living, IX. The return of the pulse. In autumn of 1891, a series of unexplained electrical surges affected telegraph lines across northern England. Operators reported Morse transmissions, forming coherent phrases, though no station was sending. The decoded message repeated a single sentence. The page remembers every reader. Within weeks, an epidemic of sleeplessness spread among clerks, librarians, and typists handling archival material. Their pulse rate slowed to precisely 42 beats per minute, the same rhythm noted by Dean decades earlier. Physicians described the condition as textual resonance. Some victims survived, others faded into states of quiet catatonia, mouths moving as if reciting. Their hospital sheets bore faint lines of printed type that bled through from the fabric itself. Contemporary note, Ministry of Records, 2020 restricted. Digitization of the Harrowick archives completed February 2020. Files uploaded to secure server, Harrowick main. Within 24 hours, system logs recorded spontaneous generation of 1/312 new documents. File metadata traced origin to user unknown. Device none. Cybersecurity analysis revealed each new file contained slight variations of a single phrase written in typeface Courier new. The pulse beneath the ink persists. Attempts to delete the files result in replication across external drives. One technician reported a sensation, like a second heartbeat in the fingertips. He was advised to rest. The next morning his workstation displayed new text typed during the night, though surveillance confirmed no entry to the lab. The message read, "Stop reading aloud." XI. Addendum, unsigned, found appended to the digital file. There are no readers, only vessels. We who transcribe are merely the latest tissue. The ledger writes through us, not upon us. When blood slows to 42 beats, the ink begins to rise. When the eye dilates, the page inhales. The inheritance continues. It was never bound to paper, and so the pulse continues its migration. Through archives, through networks, through the minute tremors of human memory that mistake recollection for thought. The Harrowick doctrine was not prophecy, nor curse, but blueprint, the anatomy of information that refuses to die. If you feel the faintest pressure behind your temples as you finish reading, it is only the text aligning itself with your rhythm. Nothing to fear. Nothing at all. It was October 1891, when the first heavy rains fell over Harrowick in nearly a decade. The ground, long cracked from drought and neglect, seemed to drink with a kind of greed. But with the returning waters came something older. Something the new caretakers could neither name nor contain. Professor Gideon Vance, who had leased the remaining acres of the Harrowick tract for agricultural study, recorded in his log, 10th October, 1891, the soil remains strangely sterile in certain plots, though we have cleared the brush and salted the wells. Near the northern boundary, under what the locals call the sink field, the men found a hollow chamber. I forbade them to enter until proper survey. Yet one, a laborer named Cook, disobeyed. He has not been seen since. The following day, Vance sent for his assistant, Clara Eames, a historian familiar with local land deeds. She arrived to find him fevered and delirious, the journal open before him, ink smudged where his hand shook. He muttered repeatedly that, "Breathes down there." Clara took over the record, keeping thereafter, writing in clear, spare script as though to impose order on madness. 11th October. Professor Vance has fallen ill. He speaks of rot moving beneath the roots of the walnut trees. When I asked if he meant fungal disease, he replied, "Not of plants, of blood." The Harrowick property had been dormant for over 40 years, its last known occupants disappearing after the fire of 1849. The ruins of the main house had long since collapsed, overgrown by sumac and vine. Though locals said the cellars still stood, Clara was skeptical of the superstitions that lingered, whispered tales of the Ashworth sisters, and the physician who had lied the land. Yet when she examined parish death records, she found dozens of entries in the years 1847 to 1849 marked with the same notation, fever of unknown origin. By mid-October, 3 more men vanished from the site. The surviving crew refused to return, claiming the air beneath the hill hummed like a hive, and that shadows gathered even under full noon. Clara recorded their accounts faithfully, though she added in the margins, likely carbonic vapors, perhaps a cavern exhaling marsh gases. But on the night of the 19th she herself heard it, a low vibration emanating through the timbers of her quarters, pulsing like a heartbeat. She traced it to the open shaft in the sink field. The air within was cold and damp, carrying the odor of salt and copper. When she lowered her lantern, she saw steps cut into the packed clay, descending deeper than the light could reach. Clara wrote a final entry that night, 19 October. I believe this may be the subcellar described in the Ashworth estate inventory. A lower chamber for medical containment. The architecture predates the house. I will descend at first light. She never wrote again. 3 days later, a search party found the shaft collapsed. Professor Vance had vanished entirely. His quarters were stripped bare save for his boots and the unfinished journal. The state constable closed the site, citing unstable terrain. Within months, the Harrowick project was quietly abandoned, and the land sold back to the county. It might have ended there, another failed excavation and a few lost souls folded into local legend, except for the discovery made 93 years later, in 1984. Surveyors mapping floodplains after a levee failure uncovered fragments of paper sealed in waxed glass near the old sink field. The documents were remarkably well preserved. Among them were several pages from the Vance journal, 2 pages of Clara Eames's notes, and an anatomical sketch labeled simply, Generation X Specimen. Archivist Marianne Colby of the Alabama Historical Society cataloged the findings. Her summary, filed 12 March 1985 reads, The Harrowick papers suggest an ongoing medical program initiated by the Ashworth family between 1834 and 1849, involving experiments in bloodline correction, selective breeding, and transfusion between related subjects. Subsequent notes by Prof. Vance imply that the practice, or the belief in its continuation, persisted into the late 19th century. The evidence of subterranean architecture may indicate containment facilities. Further excavation was advised but denied due to groundwater instability. A Colby's report was quietly shelved. In 2001, a graduate student named Evan LaRue reopened the Harrowick file for his thesis on antebellum bioethics and hereditary fear. He obtained digital scans of the Vance fragments and began cross-referencing names in census and asylum records. That's when the pattern emerged. Several descendants of families neighboring Harrowick, especially those of mixed lineage, showed unusual clustering of genetic disorders, albinism, polydactyly, and congenital deafness, but stranger still were the psychiatric annotations. Between 1902 and 1967, 9 individuals admitted to institutions in Montgomery and Selma claimed direct descent from the Harrowick sisters, or the Ashworth twins. In every case, they exhibited identical delusions that something in the soil called to them, and that they must return and feed it. LaRue wrote in his field notes, I cannot dismiss this as folklore. The repetition across generations implies either a hereditary psychosis or an inherited trauma coded into memory itself. The Ashworth name appears to vanish by 1850, but the line did not. It merely changed spelling. Within months of his draft submission, LaRue vanished. His apartment was found locked from the inside, his laptop open on a single untitled document containing the phrase, repeated dozens of times, I heard it under the house. The university archived his materials, but did not pursue the case further. The present voice, recovered audio transcript, 2024. Most people think Harrowick's just a ghost story, but the soil surveys still flag anomalies, trace elements consistent with human remains, though no graves are recorded. When we drilled core samples near the old well, we hit organic matter at 12 meters. Fibrous, vascular, but not root. The chemical tests read partial hemoglobin signatures. You tell me what plant bleeds. What's strange is the sound. Below a certain frequency, the monitors pick up resonance, rhythmic, like respiration. It's been there since we began recording. Steady, cyclical, alive. Sometimes the waveform spikes when we speak over the shaft, as though it's answering. The speaker hesitates before the recorder clicks off. A long hiss follows, then a whisper barely audible beneath static. Not buried, still growing. When the Harrowick Ledger channel uploaded its investigation video in 2025, most viewers dismissed it as performance art. Grainy footage of an old well, muffled whispers, and a woman's voice reading fragments of the Ashworth letters. But those who listened carefully noted that the background hum matched the low-frequency drone described in Vance's notes from 1891. The upload was removed within a week. The original poster's account was deactivated. Yet copies persist, mirrored across anonymous servers, with comments claiming auditory hallucinations, nosebleeds, and nausea when played through headphones. A pinned comment under one surviving mirror reads simply, "If you hear the heartbeat, don't answer." Some say the Harrowick field is still guarded by the county, though no one lists it on official maps. Satellite images show the land remains undeveloped, the soil too unstable for construction. Locals claim they see faint lights flickering under the ground after storms, like lanterns moving beneath the surface. And when the rain comes, just as it did in 1891, some still swear they can hear it, that deep, steady rhythm pulsing through the earth. Not thunder, not water, something older, patient, waiting to be remembered. The Harrowick tract was officially condemned in 2026. That's the line the county released to the press. Condemned, as if you could simply fence off a century and a half of buried sin, as if what lay beneath could be contained by wire and statute. The official reasoning cited unstable subsoil and chemical contamination. Unofficially, 3 surveyors never came home after entering the northern boundary. Their equipment was recovered 2 days later, laid out in careful order at the edge of the sink field, as though someone, or something, had returned it. When the footage from their body cameras was retrieved, the last frames showed what looked like the inside of a lung, pulsating walls slick with moisture, red, veined and moving with a slow, deliberate breath. One of them can be heard whispering, "It's alive down here." Then static. The footage was sealed under state archive restrictions, but a low-resolution copy circulated online for less than a day before being scrubbed. That was when the legend returned in earnest. The university suspended its archaeological department indefinitely. The chair of anthropology resigned, and the Harrowick collection, those surviving letters, the anatomical sketch, and the remnants of the Vance journal, was placed in a restricted vault. Only one line from Professor Vance's final, undated page is now publicly known. It was never the twins' corruption. It was inheritance itself. No one knows what he meant, but historians who've studied the earlier material, especially the breeding logs, note that the Ashworth line's experiments were not meant to end. They were designed to continue. A theory emerged among a few fringe academics that the family's pursuit of purification had backfired, awakening a form of parasitic heredity that learned to reproduce without a host. The word used, half-jokingly at first, was symbiogenesis. It no longer sounds funny. In 2027, an anonymous donor funded a digital restoration of the Harrowick Ledger episodes. The project team never made it past Part 7. Every workstation in the lab began exhibiting data corruption, localized to the same audio frequency range. One researcher described hearing a heartbeat behind the static. The following morning, she was found asleep on the floor of the server room, lips blue, a small trickle of blood from her nose. She could not be woken for 3 days. Her first words upon waking were, "It knows my name." Scholars, journalists, amateur sleuths, all tried to map the Ashworth lineage. They never agreed on how many children the twin sisters bore, or where those children went after Wisconsin. Some genealogical trails lead to New England, others to Louisiana, a few, uneasily, to Philadelphia. The only consistent anomaly is the recurrence of the same stillbirth date across several branches. October 15th, the anniversary of the Hanville Courthouse fire in 1849. Medical notes from 1913, 1939, and 1972 all describe infants born with unusual spinal deformities and patches of keratin tissue resembling scale. Each case was recorded as non-viable. Yet in the 1980s, 2 coroners in different states logged newborns with similar traits, but listed the cause of death as refused examination. Both certificates were later amended. The handwriting on the amendments matches no known staff signatures. By 2028, the county began draining the flood basin near the original Harrowick sink field. Excavation machinery reached 12 meters before striking a cavity. The water that filled it was black, viscous, and smelled of salt. Divers reported no visibility and aborted entry after the first minute. The second attempt used submersible cameras. The footage, brief, grainy, showed hundreds of shapes suspended in the fluid, white and soft, connected by tendrils. They appeared to pulse faintly, as if in synchronized respiration. The feed cut when the cable was severed from below. Tests on the recovered water showed high concentrations of hemoglobin, human mitochondrial DNA, and an unclassified protein lattice described by the analyst as self-replicating. Within hours of exposure to air, the sample hardened into a film resembling parchment. The county sealed the cavity with concrete. The report ends there, but several construction workers later complained of vibrations in the new foundation and refused further shifts. The last verifiable descendant of the Ashworth line, an elderly woman named Ruthane Palmer, died in 2029 in a Madison nursing home. She left behind a single page written in a shaky hand. "I hear them calling under the house again. They've learned how to sound like us." Her nurse, interviewed months later, said that for weeks before her death, the old woman's heartbeat registered on the monitor as 2 overlapping rhythms, slightly out of sync. When the Harrowick Ledger Channel uploaded its 10th and final episode in 2030, the voiceover was not the usual narrator. It was male, flat, deliberate. No introduction, no closing credits, just a static image of the ruined sink field and the sound of rain. At 3 minutes, 22 seconds, the voice said, "Inheritance is the oldest contagion." The Ashworths tried to cure it. Instead, they made it remember. Then silence. Viewers who enhanced the final audio noted a faint whisper beneath the static, a woman's voice repeating, "Welcome back." Before we continue, like, subscribe, share. That was the line used in the first episode, the introduction from years before. But the voice wasn't the narrator's. It was the recovered voice of Clara Eames, recorded in 1891. After that, the Harrowick Ledger vanished from all platforms. The surviving mirrors cut to black midway through playback. The rest of the file, approximately 7 minutes, is filled with subsonic frequencies that most devices cannot render. Some who attempted to listen on studio equipment reported dizziness, blackouts, and nosebleeds. A technician at a university archive described seeing movement on his waveform monitor, shapes that bent the graph like something breathing against the screen. He unplugged the system. The movement continued for another 8 seconds before fading. That file remains quarantined in off-network storage. The name of the directory is AHWORTHGRAFT. If you travel through that part of Alabama today, you won't find Harrowick on any map. The county zoned the land as conservation territory, citing soil reclamation. The sink field lies under 30 feet of clay and concrete. Still, locals claim that after storms, the ground swells subtly, as though something beneath were exhaling. A few nights each year, hunters say they hear distant knocking from underfoot, like slow, deliberate tapping, always 3 beats. Then silence. People leave offerings now, candles, jars of salt, pieces of silver. No one remembers why. They just say it's safer that way. In 2031, the Historical Society attempted a final exhibition titled Bell River to Harrowick, Anatomies of Inheritance. It never opened. During installation, humidity sensors in the sealed archive began fluctuating wildly. Several display cases were found misted from within, as though something inside had been breathing. The exhibition was cancelled. The staff destroyed the materials and resigned en masse. That night, the museum's sprinkler system activated despite clear weather. Visitors who saw the footage say that before the cameras went dark, you could see condensation forming shapes on the glass. Letters, slowly spelling one word, Remember. So perhaps it never ended. Perhaps the experiments the Ashworths began in 1834 succeeded after all, not in the way they intended, but in the only way such things ever could. Perhaps every attempt to document it only feeds the cycle. Every repetition, every retelling, another act of replication. The ledger grows. If you've listened this far, if you've read these words, you've already let it in. The pattern persists through memory, through blood, through sound. If you hear it, the heartbeat under the rain, don't answer. Don't dig. Don't remember too loudly.